Hey everyone, we just finished up the Advanced Admin Study group for today. It was on process automation, so we hit specifically approval processes, generically speaking, process automation, as well as formulas. Next week, we wrap up the entire series with one more session on process automations, which will focus on Visualforce and Apex. And then we're going to do just a generic Q&A across all of our topics, and we will wrap it up next week. If you've been tuning in and watching this series, thank you so much for doing that. And to all of those who have been participating, you're just fantastic. It's been such a pleasure to work with you guys. So we will be back again next week for our final, and we will kick you over now to watch this week's session. Thanks. All right, good afternoon, everyone. This is the second to the last of our sessions. We're hitting the topic in the Advanced Admin Study group for process automations today. So we have three presenters, and we will go ahead and start off with Marciana. You are going to kick us off today.
Awesome. Thank you, Terry. Let me share my screen. Alrighty, can everybody see it?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay. Alrighty, so today we're going to go over approval processes. I will be giving a scenario and going through those steps of how to troubleshoot within an approval process. So the scenario is the finance department from Regal Net Worth Inc. must check expenses for all the sales reps that attended sales conferences throughout the year. If a sales rep spends less than or equal to $6,000, the finance department doesn't need to check it. But if they spend more than $6,000 and less than $100,000, it will require approval from their sales manager, and any expenses above $100,000 will require approval from the director of sales. So that was the scenario. But first, I want to go into what is an approval process? There are automated processes implemented to approve records in Salesforce. Basically, it's like approving homework. If you remember going through schooling, you get that stamp of approval that you completed a certain task correctly. These steps within an approval process. I found this great diagram on Trailhead, and they talk, and I like the questions that they put on this diagram. This will help you as an admin, to flesh out whether you need an approval process or not. So, starting from the top, submit for approval. Who will approve these? Who will be able to submit records? Is it going to be your sales reps? Is it going to be the managers? Is it going to be your customers submitting approval? Volunteers is another one that I've seen while working in a Salesforce org. And then the next step after submitting the approval is the entry criteria. So what records need to be approved, right? That's basically some of those summary of what the two questions are asking. What records need to be approved? And the next after that, they'll go through the initial submission actions. Those are what happens when the record is submitted for approval. And then we go through approval steps, which I'll talk about in the next slide. And then it's what happens when and then we go into 3 sections, which is the final approval, the recall actions, and the final rejections. What happens when a record is approved? So what action should the user take? What happens if the record is recalled? I don't know if that is used frequently. A lot of people do not talk about this one. And this one was not on the exam. Hold on one second, folks. Alrighty, sorry about that. So then the last section is the final rejection actions. So what happens if the person who's approving these records does not, doesn't want it to be approved, basically rejected. So for this diagram, the reason why I like this diagram so much because it shows um, what what actions can be taken during each step. So for submitting approval, you can either you can submit it manually. You can submit it through a button using a flow. You can submit it automatically using a flow or process builder or Apex trigger. The entry criteria, it checks the records against specific criteria as you, the admin, creates. The initial submission action, it could be an email alert, field update, tasks, or outbound messages, similar to workflow actions. And then the approval steps define how the record goes through the approval process, and it defines the approvers within each step. And then finally, you have the final actions, which send notification and can do field updates as well. So for the scenario that I talked about earlier, this is what I thought of, and I would love to hear your feedback on this afterwards. Um, I decided to name it expenses approval report, and the amount would be greater than 6,000, and the submitter would be sales reps. Initially, we'll lock the record and set the approval status to pending. When if it's above 6,000 and under 100,000, that's when the sales manager um is the approver, so they could either reject it or approve it. And then if it's above under no, if it's above 100,000, then the director of sales can approve it, and then they would go through those same actions listed here. Any feedback on my my solution for the scenario? Is there anything that you guys would have done differently?
Not that I see from here.
Yeah, the only thing I see, and it's not even a real issue, would be you wouldn't need an amount greater than 6,000 on step one if that's your entry criteria. But again, it's kind of irrelevant. It would, but
Do
otherwise, yeah, that looks pretty simple.
do you need to set like a delegated approver?
Delegated approvers would not be in the approval process itself. That's a individual setting for the user, but um, talk to me about how delegated approvers work.
That is true. On the user record, there is that other user, right? Under manager, it's like delegated
Mhm.
approval now that you say that.
Yeah. And do you know how that works?
Mm,
Anybody want to jump in with that? Everyone's
so that
quiet
is
on that.
so that's different on the approval process. You don't have to assign an approver or like a delegated approver.
So let's say I'm the sales manager and I wanted to have on my user record, Meredith, I wanted you to be my delegated approver. That just means that you could approve the process on my behalf.
Okay, so it's not set per approval process, it's just,
It's an individual choice on the user side.
okay,
Yeah.
cool, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So this looks like it's one approver no matter the situation. So if it was over 100,000, could you go to the sales manager for a first approval, and if they approval, it goes to the director of sales? Is that a different way you could set this up?
Yeah, in other words, bypass the sales manager.
No, I think what he's
What you're
asking is
asking.
have two approvers on step 2. It would go to the sales manager. Sales manager would have to approve it, and then it'd go to the director of sales, which I believe is it's a set of steps that you can set up in the approval process.
Mm-hmm. So the sales manager can
Would see both.
Yeah, protect the whatever goes past him
Yes,
for over
yeah.
100,000.
Absolutely.
So I'm thinking you're talking about either unanimous approval or first response approval. Maybe that's what what you are referring to.
So there is that concept as well. I don't think that's not how I was interpreting the thought. What I was hearing, was that Boone? Was that you that was mentioning that? I forget who that was, but that the sales manager would have to approve. So let's say our scenario is it's $150,000 deal. The sales manager would have to approve that first before it goes to the director of sales, but it would ultimately have to be approved by the director of sales. Is that
Correct? Yep.
Is that what we're saying?
That's what I was talking about.
Oh,
Tanner,
got it.
got it. But if it's 100,000, let's say it's 85,000, then the sales manager could approve it and it would be final.
Right.
If the sales manager approved it, say it was back on that $150,000 deal, sales manager doesn't approve it, then that would not go to the director either. That would be rejected, I believe. I believe that's how that would work. Maybe there's the option to override that too, but I would tell you I'm not a huge fan of approval processes, just because it's not the process as much as the interface. I just hate the way that it's structured.
I'm right there with you.
Yeah, love the concept, hate the implementation of it.
What just want to say it for approval, instead of having individual, if you have like a large enterprise, maybe easier to do public groups, so you can have multiple. If you have changes in management, it's easier to manage that way.
Yeah, good call. You got your sound fixed, it looks like, Scott. Good. Excellent.
Alrighty, thank you all for your feedback on on my solution. I appreciate that. So next we're gonna go into some troubleshooting tips. So first, the approval history related list. This checks the status on the approval record. So for this tip, I believe it's the use case for this is maybe we have a inpatient sales rep or inpatient submitter, and they really want to know where their record is in the approval status. In the approval process. Does anyone have any other use cases that might relate to this?
This is useful when one person takes over another person's opportunities and accounts, so you can see, if something's already been submitted up, approved, rejected, or whatever, so they don't have to retrack all that down.
So kind of like for reporting as well?
Sure.
It's really helpful for sales managers on opportunities. So if an opportunity hit a certain level and had to be approved, but then fell back, you can kind of see when it triggered those and got approved in the past.
Mm, good use cases. Good use cases. Thank you very much. The next tip is to automate submission. As I mentioned earlier, there's a submit for approval button on the record itself. And you can use process flow or process builder or flow to automate it. Just in case, well, for this use case, I was thinking users may forget to click the submit for approval button, so that way it'll be easier to automate it. Any other thoughts on this, or should I go to the next one?
I think that's a good call out, because I often get confused when there's that entry criteria. I will frequently think, well, it matches the entry criteria. Why does it need to be submitted? It shouldn't just automatically go. But you still have to kick it off to get it to run through. So.
Alrighty. Delegate approver. So, as Terry mentioned, well, when I first was doing research on this, they mentioned that the delegate approver should act on behalf of the main approver, and that it should be filled out on the user record. But the manager field should be filled out as well, just in case. I don't know. I feel like the manager field is more important within a approval process, because as I was creating one, the manager field was not filled and I could not submit for approval. Did anyone have any well, I know Terry, you mentioned it earlier, but did anyone else have any issues with the delegate approver?
And I'm assuming the reason that it wouldn't let you create the approval or submit the record for approval without a manager was probably because it was your manager who had to do the approval based off of whatever the criteria was in the approval step. So that's probably why it wouldn't have gone through without a manager.
Oh yeah, that's what it was. Thank you for that reminder, Terry.
Scott mentioned it earlier. Using the public groups kind of helps you get away from that as well.
Yeah, that's a great tip.
So next is the mass transfer approvals. So this was a new topic for me as I was going through this. So basically, if a approver is out of office and they have a bunch of approval records to work on that they left idle, and the other person could take over, or the user no longer works, the approver no longer works at the company, and they need to transfer that to the new user. And then for email approvals, this is when the approver gets an email request, which allows a user to make a decision. For this, I think the use case would work very well with executives who do not like to log into Salesforce, or I shouldn't say like, but do not have the time to log into Salesforce. They could easily just write approve on the first line, and then it will approve the record in Salesforce, and they could save the extra steps of logging in. But has anyone ever used email approvals? Because I personally have not. And now, after learning about it, I'm pretty excited to try it.
I haven't used it, so I can't give feedback, but can you set that up so that it goes to a non-Salesforce user for approval? I don't remember if
I
that's
don't
the case.
believe
If
so.
you can do that. Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
I
I
didn't
don't
think
think
so,
so.
but wasn't sure.
Yeah, they have to be a user in Salesforce, and then you could just send it. I think
I was
it
thinking
goes to them.
like an email list, and then somebody on that list could just type approve and respond. But I wasn't sure. It's good to know.
That will be great. That's a great idea. Idea
Mhm.
exchange team, if you're listening, that's a good one. Alrighty,
Make sure to go
so
post that.
right. So that wraps up my presentation on approval processes. These are the resources that I found on approval processes. They're all Salesforce help documents,
Perfect.
FYI.
Excellent.
So thank you all for watching my presentation.
Thanks, Marciana. I appreciate it. All right, Meredith, you are up with process automation.
All right. Let me get this going. Okay. Can you see my screen?
Looks good.
So given a scenario, determine the solution using a combination of automation tools to solve a business problem. So I'm going to go through actually 5. So workflow rules, process builder, approvals, flow, and then Apex, but focus on the 4 and very little on Apex. Maybe Carla and Terry can add more on that. So for workflow rules, really old school, it's the single if then statement. And you need to set evaluation criteria whenever you're running these rules. So basically, they can do 4 main things. They can update a field, send an email, create a task, or send an outbound message to another system. Everything I've researched is, don't do any building and workflow. If you have to decide to build something today, it's kind of an old tool. Salesforce isn't doing any enhancements with this. Next, we have Process Builder. So it gives you a little more functionality. So you have multiple if-then statements. You can see the history. So there's like what they call versioning. So you can see like older versions of Process Builders and kind of see what you did before. The deactivated versions versus the active version. With Process Builder, you can update any related record, and it starts when a record is created or updated, invoked by another process, or a platform event message is received. So there's a long list of things that Process Builder can do. You can create a record of any type, update any related record, not just the record or its parent. You can use a quick action, invoke a process from another process, launch a flow, send an email, send a custom notification, post a chatter, or submit a record for approval. Marciana just went over approval processes, so I don't think I need to get into too much detail with that. And then with flows, they're a lot more complex. So it updates any record. It's pretty much the closest tool we have as admins to code. Starts when a user clicks a button or a link, a user accesses a Lightning page, Experience, Cloud site, Visualforce, or custom tab. The user accesses an item in a utility bar, process starts, or Apex is called. And I just wrote a short list of things it can do. Display data to users with screen elements. Those are the screen flows. Control the logic by creating branches and looping over data sets. And then look up, create, update, or delete Salesforce records. So these are the main flow types. The guidance on whether to use Process Builder or Flow, from what I've seen, is again, you can use Process Builder if you want, but all of the new building is in Flow. So that's kind of the direction that Salesforce is going. This is a very complex chart, and I can take you to the site, but it was kind of hard for me to understand. It says when to use Apex. It just says complex Salesforce automation. I thought, well, what does complex really mean? How do you define that? And it says, when you're integrating with other systems. So this was the chart that Salesforce provided. And this was the one that maybe Carla and Terry could elaborate on, or I could just pull up that site, not to put you on the spot.
So is that the architecture site that you found this one on?
Yes.
Yeah. Do you want to take first stab at it, Carla, or you want me to?
Oh, that's fine. In my opinion, I feel like complex could mean like number of records, right? You're going to run into governor limits when you're processing things with flow that you might otherwise be able to do it better in Apex. I've done some really complicated things in flow, and as Terry probably has too. So I agree with you that term is very subjective. But for me, it's been I've used flow to expand on the most complicated use cases. I try to do all of what I can do in flow, and then if I really can't do it in flow, then I'll go to Apex. I know that's not a great answer. I don't know, Tara, if you want to add some thoughts.
I kind of follow that same philosophy. If I can do it in flow, I'll do it in flow. If I can't, I will shift over to Apex. There are some things when you are needing to loop through a series of records and you have to go reference other records in the process. It's that there's just some level of complexity there where it just is easier to do it in Apex. It's Apex can just do a lot of those things more efficiently, and so if you can code it, then I would go there. There's a lot of times with inflow, I will leverage Apex to handle things or to process data that's more complex that I can't do effectively within the flow. I can do everything else in the flow, but there's this one little piece that is got enough complexity to it that I will send that off to Apex to do it and then return a result set for me. That's also another nice way of leveraging both.
That's what I tend to do a lot too. I start things in flow, and then hand off to Apex for the very complicated pieces I can't accomplish in flow.
And it's actually kind of interesting how it's progressed over the years. In the past, a lot of things that you would have used flow for today, you had to use Apex for in the past. And now that we have flow, it's really reduced and the number of times you have here integrating with other systems. That's one of the big things we're using right now Apex for, because we're combining some tables between external databases and then internal to Salesforce tables, and just to understand how to properly populate some of those external tables with the internal data. So that's kind of one of the areas where it's the most useful.
Thanks, guys. That's really helpful. So I grabbed these scenarios from Trailhead. So if you want to jump in, it's going to be, what process, it could be multiple, would you use for these? And I know a lot of these, Terry would just say, just do flow. Better, but we can debate, right, on what we use. So guide a site member through requesting a new credit card with a step-by-step wizard.
Flow.
Correct. And what was your tip off for that you felt that would be the best solution?
Wizard.
And where it says guide.
Yeah. So they're visually seeing it. Okay, a sales rep clicks a button on an opportunity which launches a discount calculator. So would it be workflow, single if then?
I'd almost say process builder.
Okay. Anybody else debate that?
I'm kind of hung up on the discount calculator part.
Me too. Yep.
Is that part of this or not?
The discount calculator would that be the flow?
That's what I'm thinking. Like, is
Process
that
builder would run the or trigger the flow.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I was caught on the clicking a button where the
Right.
process builder would launch a flow, but
Yeah.
Good.
Do it all within a flow. A screen flow, right? If the discount calculator is in the flow.
Yeah.
Let's say the discount calculator is a Lightning component. Does it
True.
change your answer? It's kind of a
Maybe.
trick. It's kind of a trick
It
question.
is a tricky one.
Because
They didn't elaborate on these. The next one is when an
Right.
account is updated, update all of the contacts related to that account.
Process builder.
yeah, I
Flow.
agree.
Either one. When an opportunity stage is updated, also update a custom checkbox field.
All the above.
Create a task when a platform event occurs. Update a lead record in Salesforce after a certain amount of time passes or when a specified time is reached.
Ooh, there's a key word there. I'm going to say process builder.
Both. I think that's a new
you can do it
functionality
now
for
in both.
flow.
Oh, yeah, with the new capabilities in Flow.
When an opportunity closes, automatically create a renewal opportunity.
Both. Oh, just flow.
Why would you not be able to do that in a process builder?
Yeah.
If you have opportunity contacts or opportunity products that you want to relate to that opportunity and you want to copy them over, definitely can't do that in process builder. But
Cross object.
That makes sense.
that's my thinking behind that.
Good call.
Route an employee's time off request to a manager for approval.
Approval process.
Yep. All right.
Awesome.
Speaking of approval process, real quick, has there been any talk about improving the approval system over time, or is it kind of just out there in limbo?
I've not heard anything about it. My preference and what I've tried to suggest to them is to create an approval template for Flow and just move it all to Flow.
That'd be
I
ideal.
second that, yes.
Yeah. And I have heard that some admins have actually created their own approval process using Flow. But I think it'd be nice if it was just all shifted that way. Because your approval process still relies on workflow role-like actions, so it's definitely dated. I just a little insight I've worked with Salesforce on writing some exam questions and things, and one of the Flow is one that's really difficult to write, or questions like Meredith, what you presented, because Flow is almost always an answer. So it's really difficult to stage a question in a fashion that where it's not a capability when you're working with an automation. But it's kind of interesting. It's kind of fun to think through some of those. So very good. Matt, are you ready?
I am ready.
Nice job, Meredith. Very good.
Good job. Let me know if you guys are seeing my screen.
Yep.
Okay. So my topic's formula fields. It's a pretty broad topic. I have a lot of information on the slides, but I won't go through all of it since some of it is fairly basic, but the slides could be used as a reference if you're looking to study, and then I have the scenarios at the end. So first, where a formula is used, they're used all over the place. You can have it be on a field. It can be part of an equation for buttons or links. It can set a default value. You can use it in any of the automated processes that Meredith just went through, or Marciano went through. It can be part of a report with custom summary formulas, can be visual force pages, or in code as controls. So data types, I'm going to hit on some of the points, just things maybe that I either didn't know or think are relevant to know as we prepare for the test. You got checkbox, true is checked, false is unchecked. Currency, this is something I didn't know. Currency uses the round half to even. So it always rounds to even with currency. So 23.5 goes to 24, so it goes up. 22.5 rounds down because it's always rounding to even. Whereas number uses the round half up. So 23.5 goes to 24, 22.5 goes up to 23. So currency rounds to even, number rounds to up at 50%. Percent stored as a decimal, that's relevant because if you're going to use percent in a formula, you need to use the decimal format and you have to have the 0 in front of the decimal. And then text in formulas returns a string up to 3,900 characters. And it can be used for all these other areas as well. If you're in the formula, some like long text area cannot be used in a formula. And none of these can be used in a summary formula, which I don't know how you would sum text up anyway.
Hang out there for a minute if you don't mind, and let's talk with us more about the rounding aspect of how this works. You're right on, and from what I remember, but I do struggle sometimes with making sure that it clicks right in my head. So I figured it's probably good to hit it one more time.
Sure. So rounding normally is going to go to the closest whole number. So the only difference between the two in the rules is when it's exactly at a half. So 23.5, or this one's a little easier to see. So 22.5 is exactly the halfway point. So when you round to even, it's going to go to the closest even whole number. In this case, the closest even whole number is 22. Whereas the rule where it's round half up is always going to go up to the nearest whole number, whether it's even or odd. So for numbers, they're using round half up, where 22.5 would go to 23. For currency, they round to even, round half to even. So it would actually round down to 22 in this case.
So it's only when it's a 0.5.
Exactly.
On the equation,
exactly.
right? Otherwise, the normal rounding rules would apply. So if we were 22.4, we would always go down to 24. I'm sorry, 22.
And if it was 22.6, would it go up to 23?
Yep.
Yes.
And then, real quick, when is that? Is that when you're using a rounding function, or is that just in general if you're trying to do, like a comparison like this?
If any rounding function.
Yeah, zero. Yeah, is it rounding only, or is it based off of the number of decimal positions that you have?
Yeah, I was thinking decimals.
Well, that kind of is rounding. Yeah, so it could be like 23.0005, and if you were doing it to 3 numbers after the decimal, the rule would still apply.
True.
to the 1,000th place.
Yeah, that's true. Right, that makes sense. So think probably the easiest way to think about it is, let's say you have 0 decimal points and you're doing some type of a calculation that ends up with a currency value of 23.5. Then it's going to store the value as 24. If we were assuming 0 decimals with the scenarios that we have on the screen. That's an easy one to forget about. And so I'm glad you brought that up. That's really good. That can throw things off and cause you to stumble really fast. Now, whether or not they put that on the exam, I don't know, but that's from an admin standpoint, you can hit your head against the wall for a long time on that if you're not aware of it. So good job.
Absolutely. Couple other data types. You got date, time, and time. That's always been an area I to use the bang your head against the wall term. Anytime I use any of these in formulas is fun. And then just as a reminder, today is the date format, now is the date time format, and time now is the time format. So if you need to talk about this moment in time, you have 3 different ways to talk about it, depending on which format you're looking for. These are not available to roll up in the custom summary formulas. And then one other thing one of the things that I've struggled with in the past is when you're trying to extract a time value from something, you actually need to put the quotation marks around it as if it's text. So you're getting a time value out of like a text field. And for time, it adds in milliseconds, whereas date time does not include milliseconds. So that is something, that I've got hung up on before, the difference between the time portion of time and then date time.
So how does your time zone play into this?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure what were you referring to?
Let's say Carla is in East Coast time and I'm in Central time, and we both look at the same record that has this formula on it.
I believe it's based out of GMT as the standard, but then it can be viewed in the local user's time zone.
Yep, you got it right. That is correct.
And that's set on the actual user account, right?
Yeah, your time zone is, yes, on your user record.
Okay. So elements of a formula, you've got a literal value. That's literally just a number or text string. Field reference, that's a reference to another field. Then you have functions, which are doing their own calculation themselves. Operators, that's like simple math operators. And then comments. So one thing I didn't know about comments is if you comment out a comment, it actually creates an error. So they call it nesting comments. So if you're just going through and quickly commenting everything and you already had a comment in there, you can't comment out a comment, or actually will create an error on its own. And then just as a practice, commenting out is a good way to test different segments of the formula.
Yeah,
I was just going to ask, can you
ahead.
use comments? I know you can use comments in the Apex, but I don't think I've ever used comments in a formula.
You absolutely can, and I was going to. This is on my Terry's Tidbits list of something to show, because you get into some of those more complex formulas, and to add comments into those can make all the difference in readability. So yes, you can 100% add comments inside your formula fields.
Can you do it in formulas and reports?
Yeah, I mean, it's the comment portion's ignored. Oh, well, inside of a report, I don't know. I've never tried it there.
Summary.
That's a good question, Tanner. I don't know the answer to that one.
I haven't done that either.
I think it's anywhere that when you get the formula box, because whether it's on a custom field or an automated process, you always get that box that pops up where you type the formula in. And I think anywhere that you can type a formula in, you can comment something out. That was my understanding of it. Okay, so I won't spend too much time on this, but these are just the different types of formula functions and operators. So you have the math operators, you have the logic operators. I'll just pause here for a second. You want to look through, these are all pretty straightforward. Notice the difference between and concatenate, which is a text operator.
Anybody ever get stuck on that one? I have to look that up almost all the time. It's like, dang it, which one is it?
And then this came off of the developer Salesforce help page, just an order of precedence, pretty straightforward, but it just kind of shows, it calculates things in parentheses first, then it goes through negation, multiplication and division, addition, subtraction, and then the different comparisons and logic and assignment last. I don't have an actual link to this in here, but if you just Google literally Salesforce operator precedence, this is on the developer page. Okay, again, I'm not going to go through all these in detail. I'm just going to point out a couple areas where I do think it's worth noting. There's a lot of date and time functions, and just something to be aware of. A lot of them, like when you use day, hour, minute, month, they're actually returning a number. So even though these are considered date and time functions, it's actually pulling a number out of a date, which you can go the other direction with taking date and then putting in these variables. But so, for example, when you use month on a date field, you're pulling out the numeric, the number that corresponds with the month of that date. So if you do month on a date in April, it's going to return the number 4. So just, this is probably one of the areas I got hung up on with a lot of date and time functions is having the right format of what you're putting in and what you're getting out of it. A lot of numbers there, and then just a second page of them. Second, weekday, and year are the same thing. Weekday returns a number 1 through 7 based on the day of the week, starting with Sunday. So if you do need to pull out that actually is useful to be able to have the day of the week. And if you want something to happen on Wednesdays, being able to pull that out as the number 4 for every date. Those are date and time. Moving on to logical functions. A lot of these logic functions are actually Boolean. So the same way that a lot of the date time functions are numbers, a lot of these are actually Boolean. So is blank, it's asking, is this blank true or false? Is this a clone of another record, true or false? Is the value null, true or false? And a couple notes, just like they're trying to phase out workflow, they're trying to phase out a few of these functions as well. So is null is basically the same thing as is blank. Is null can only be used on numbers, and is blank can be used on numbers or text. So is blank is the better option moving forward. A few more logical, same thing here.
Is there one that works on pick lists?
There's only 3 functions that work on pick lists, and I actually have that in a couple slides. So I'll show that if you don't mind, just a couple slides. Same thing with the null value versus blank value. So this is kind of a check and replace function. Null value only works for numbers. Blank value works for numbers and text. And again, what that does is checks to see if something is blank. If it's blank, it replaces it with a value. So you'd say null value, put in the variable you're looking at, and then a replacement value. And then if it's blank, it'll replace it with the replacement. If it's not blank, it'll leave it with whatever's already in there. So, and Terry, I don't know how much we want to go into all of these. I don't think that could take like 2 hours. So I wasn't going to go through every one in detail.
Good.
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 Math functions. So absolute value ceiling. I'm mentioning this one because I just ran into this. I used to be used to using the trunc function to truncate. Floor is actually the way that you truncate now. So if you've used trunc in the past, it's now floor. So floor and ceiling are the way that you round up and down. And there's also M floor and M ceiling. And the difference is really what happens with the negative number. So a ceiling rounds to the nearest integer and away from 0 if it's negative. So in that same scenario, 22.5 would round to 23. Negative 22.5 would round to negative 23. That's with ceiling. With M ceiling, it always rounds up. So it rounds up. 22.5 would round up to 23. Negative 22.5 would round up to negative 22. So it's another difference in rounding, and that's the M's, M floor and M ceiling. Text functions. There's a lot of text functions. I have this on the slides. If the slides, Terry uploaded them for me on the folder if you want to reference them. But it would take a long time to go through all these scenarios. I don't think we want to do that right now. So I'm just gonna go through these quickly. These two I did mention, this is a little bit of a continuation of last week when we talked about summary roll-up formulas. But just because I wasn't super familiar with this, I will quickly mention you have parent group value and previous group value. I did find, as I looked for practice problems, I did find reference to these. So this I do think is worth mentioning. Parent group value is useful when you're looking at how a value compares to a percentage of the whole. And I'll show an example of that. Previous group value takes different rows and basically says, how does this row compare to a previous row? And I'll show a quick example of both of these. So this is a parent group val. So basically, I have 66 total records, and I can use a formula that uses parent group val to say, what percentage does the web record count divided by the parent group val, which is the grand total, what percentage is that? So this 31.8 used this record count and the parent group val to show the percentage that each one is of the total. So that would be a real life usage of parent group val. Previous group val is you're comparing, and you don't have to just compare to the one row before you. That's probably the most common use. So in this situation, the amount difference is comparing this value to the previous group value. So this is a summary field for February's amount. This is a summary of January's amount. And this number compared to the previous group val is negative 35. It's also useful if you want to do like a running total. So if you want to have like a rolling, like a 2-month rolling average or a 3-week rolling average, you can use previous group val to get the comparison to previous times. Advanced formulas, I don't think that this would necessarily be used on the exam. I know that the is changed is probably out of these the most common one that I've used before, just to see if something is changed from a previous value. And then out of these, again, this is getting into more complicated stuff, but this regex is used to like make sure that something is in the proper format. So for example, if you need to make sure that a phone number has 10 digits, it checks to make sure that it's in the proper format. Okay, the pick list question, good question. What works on pick list? The only 3 functions that work on pick list, you can use the is pick val, which is a Boolean to figure out for a pick list value. You can use case, where you can use, with case, you start with the variable that you're looking at, and then you have a value and then what to return for each one of those case options. So you can have the pick list values be part of case, and you could take a pick list value and convert it to text. So those are the only 3 that work for pick list. I don't think that would be crazy if that was some sort of a question on the test. For multi-select pick lists, you also have includes, is blank, is null, and remember is blank is the replacement for is null, is changed, and then prior value. So those are the 2 on pick lists. Couple limitations. So just, this is a security question, but formulas that reference another object, the users are going to be able to see the result of that field in that field, even if they don't have access to the object. The example they give is if I have a case formula that refers to an account field and the user cannot see accounts at all, they will be able to see the account field as part of this formula. Cannot use long text area, encrypted, or description fields in formulas at all. Max number of displayed characters on a formula is 1,300. And they kind of talk about like stringing together multiple formulas into multiple fields if you need to go longer than that. But I can only imagine that would be a text type thing where you would need that many characters. The formula itself is limited to 3,900 characters or 4,000 bytes. That's the save side limits. And that includes commas, spaces, returns, comments. Even if you comment something out, that still counts as characters and byte size. So if you get into a really long comment, Again, this is where you can like nest a formula inside a formula. If you do need it to be longer than that, you can actually have the formula refer to another field where you have part of the formula if you need it to be longer than that. But 3,900 characters or 4,000 bytes is the save size limit. And then 5,000 bytes is the compile size limit. So those are just a couple examples of ways to shorten it if you need to. Okay, so we got just a couple minutes left, and I found a few questions on this. So I'll throw this out to the group, and whoever wants to jump in. Bright Paints would like to understand how many leads were captured per month in the last year and highlight the months where more than 20% of the total leads for the year were captured in that month. Which report features could be used to meet this requirement?
A.
Very good. So custom summary formulas, parent group val function, which we just kind of talked about, and conditional highlighting. Those are the three. And that's just kind of showing how it's put into place. Okay. Which text formula is correct to assign a value based on a custom lead field? Basically, which one of these is the proper format for case?
Two.
I appreciate you jumping in with the guess. This says,
I was wondering if
says
the
number
no,
one.
yeah.
Terry, I had a question on this one because this has number one as the right answer. Presumably lead score is a number. So that's why you'd want the numbers without the quotation marks. And these are text, so you do want the quotation marks. You don't need quotations on null, do you? Unless you're actually just returning
if you're writing it
null.
back as null, you would. Yeah, and so because you're returning a text value, everything has to be a text that gets returned. So 3 would be wrong because it would error out because of that null.
So it wouldn't actually be null; it would say null.
Yes, it will. Yeah, it would say null.
Right.
Okay. And the reason
I guess the quotes on 3 is different too, aren't they? I just noticed that.
Yeah, they're all backwards on 3.
Yeah.
The reason 2 and 4, in addition to some of that formatting, is wrong is because you actually have to have this last value, which is if it's 10, do this, if it's 20, do this, if it's 30, do this. Otherwise, you have to have the otherwise value do this. So that's for case. It always ends up that you need an even number of arguments. So you have these in pairs, and then you have the variable, and then the otherwise. So you should always have an even number for case. Okay. I don't know if we're out of time for these. I have just a couple more.
Go ahead real quick on one and we'll wrap up.
So this is a case due date calculation. So it's basically saying, what does this formula do? What is it telling me to do?
If it's a high priority, add 2 to the date. So put 2 days forward. If it's priority is medium, add 5 to the created date. And
otherwise add 7.
Yeah, there you go.
Exactly. Yep. So it's creating a due date. And exactly like Tanner just said, if it's high priority, 2 days from the created date, medium 5, otherwise 7. Okay. This is an interesting one. So it uses the function we just talked about, floor.
So you're going to get a number back.
So you're going to get basically their current age.
Yeah, the number of years they are.
Yeah. It gives the age as a whole number. So today minus birth date is going to give me a number of days. So, 12,000 days old Dividing it by 365 gives years. That's going to give you years with a decimal, and floor makes it a whole number.
All right, and we'll cut it off there, Matt. That might have been your last one. I'm not sure, but since we are at the top of the hour, just a little bit over, and I know some had to jump out. But excellent job to all of you doing the presentation. Next week is our final group meeting. Patrick had to jump off, but I think he is aware that he's got the next presentation, and then it's going to be a Q&A session next week. So come back again next week. We'll get it wrapped up at that point. And thank you so much. Have a great rest of your week.